Alright, 5.3.1. It's kind of like an intro to quadratics. Intro. That's probably not going to work, is it?
What?
Do you need me to throw that away?
Oh, I was just going to wait.
Alright, so let's try this again. Intro to solving quadratics. Alright, so 5.3.1, intro to solving quadratics is where we're starting at. Keyword here is solving, okay? Before our last test, we were talking about factoring, okay? So now we're actually talking about solving quadratics, okay? I'm just going to throw out some keywords, okay? So keywords are going to be factors, and then we have zeros. What's another word for a zero? X-intercept. What's another word for x-intercept or a zero? Solutions. There's one more. Who said it? What is it? Roots. Alright? So factors, zeros, x-intercepts, solutions, roots. All those mean, all of these mean the same thing. Factors is something different, and we'll be able to distinguish that when we're solving quadratics, okay? So those are kind of like the keywords we're going to be using, and just kind of moving through in that sense, okay? There's going to be a couple different ways that we're going to solve quadratics. So, ways to solve. The first way that you're going to see is going to be by factoring. Or no, you've actually seen by graphing was the first way. Okay? We solved by graphing. Remember where they crossed the x-axis? That was the first way that we found solutions, was by graphing. So we graph the quadratic, we see where they cross the x-axis. So we've already done that. All right? The second way we're going to see, what we're going to see today, is by factoring. So this is why we did all of that stuff last week and the week before of factoring, was so that we could actually solve the equations by factoring. So factoring isn't actually solving, it's just a process in solving quadratics, okay? So by factoring, and we got by taking square roots, which we'll see tomorrow. We got the quadratic formula. Has anybody ever heard of that? Does anybody know it? I had one person in my last class that knew what the quadratic formula was. Ooh, that's the quadratic, that's the standard form of a quadratic. The quadratic formula is something else. It's like x equals negative b plus or minus square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. Anybody heard that before? All right, awesome. We'll get to that later, okay? And then the last way I think we're going to solve is we're going to talk about completing the square, okay? Completing the square. So these are kind of like what we're going to knock out. So if you think about it, we've already done graphing, okay? That was earlier. So the next thing that we're going to do is we're going to talk about by factoring, taking square roots, quadratic formula, complete the square. Today, we're going to focus on factoring. We're going to solve a quadratic by factoring. Okay? Any questions up to this point? All right? And then we're also going to talk about the difference between factors and these words. Okay? All right. So I'm about to erase some stuff and write a new topic on the board. Are we okay? Okay, I'll give you a second. I'll give you a second. Good? All right. So instead of 5.3.1 and moving on to 2, we decided to rearrange it. So we're going to go into 5.3.4. Okay? 5.3.4 says this: I can. Remember those I can statements. Factor, or no, I can solve. I'm sorry. I can solve a quadratic equation Are y'all okay with me? I'm kind of shorthanding it.
Yeah.
Quadratic equation, that's what that stands for. I can solve a quadratic equation by factoring, okay? And then setting the factors equal to 0. So a lot of stuff going on here. It says I can solve a quadratic equation by factoring and then setting the factors equal to 0. Okay? A lot of stuff going on. Remember, let's go ahead and just talk about an example, and that'll kind of lead us into these key words in this. Okay? So kind of the first one I'm going to show you is example 1. And what we're doing is we're solving, okay, solve for x. But we're going to be able to solve this by factor. So first example is going to say x squared plus 5x minus 6 equals 0. X squared plus 5x minus 6. Has to say equals 0 if we're solving, okay? Remember before, you can see that and you can just say factor. And you can do that. But when we're solving, it's going to be equal 0 equal f of x. Okay? So the first step is to factor this. We should all be familiar with that. Okay? So let's factor. So if I factor this, I'm going to break this into 2 pieces. Okay? Remember, how do I get x squared? X times x. What are my factors of 6? That could give me 5.
6 and 1.
6 and 1. Now, remember, I need a positive 5. So I got to think, 6 minus 1 gives me positive 5. Alright, don't forget that equals 0. Okay? Now, here's the key part. Okay? The key part right here is, since we have factored, we have broken this up into 2 pieces. X plus 6 times x minus 1 gives me this. So that tells me my factors, remember those key words, factors are of the form x plus 6 and x minus 1. So say I ask you, give me the factors of x squared plus 5x minus 6. You can tell me x plus 6, x minus 1. Those are the factors. Okay, keywords, factors. Now, let's find the solutions, or let's find the roots. Okay? So now we need to solve. So in order to solve, it says set the factors equal to 0. So remember, the factors are these 2 guys. Set them equal to 0. So x plus 6 equals 0, x minus 1 equals 0. I'm going to go the long way right now. If I'm solving for x, I subtract 6. So now I'm left with x on the left side. 0 minus 6 gives me negative 6. If I want to solve the other one for x, I add 1 over. X is equal to positive 1. So now I have my solutions. I have my zeros. What's another word? Roots. Or x-intercepts. X equals negative 6 or x equals 1. There's my answer. So my solutions are negative 6 and 1. And you're probably saying, okay, what does that mean? It means on a graph, I can go plot these 2 points. X equals negative 6. Put a point. There's x equals negative 6. X equals 1. There's x equals 1. So this tells me that this quadratic function crosses at those 2 points, something like that. I just know that my answer is negative 6 and 1. Those are my solutions, my x-intercepts. Okay? Okay by this? Not too hard. Once you factor, just solve for x. Alright, let's do a second example. Okay, can I erase? Yep. Okay, example 2. I'm going to have example 2, and this is going to be solve for x again. And this time it's going to be x squared minus 8x plus 16 equals 0. X squared minus 8x plus 16 equals 0. And I want to solve this. So what was the first thing we got to do? Factor. So we're going to factor this bad boy. What are my factors? Anybody got them?
4.
Ooh, no, that's not my factors. Remember, whenever I say factors, they have to be of a certain form. X minus something, x plus something.
X plus 4, x
So you're saying they're what?
X plus 4, x plus minus 4.
You're saying x plus
Oh, no,
4 and x
minus.
minus 4?
X minus 4, X minus 4.
It's x minus 4, x minus 4. So if I ask somebody right now, Hagen, if I ask you, what are my factors? You would tell me what?
-4, -4.
No, that's wrong.
Yes.
What did we just say? Factors have to be of the form what? X minus something?
X,
Okay, so Chastity, if I said, what are my factors? You tell me
X minus 4, X minus 4.
x minus 4, x minus 4. Those are my factors. Now, if I want to solve these, what do? Set them equal to 0. Set my factors equal to 0. So x minus 4 equals 0. X minus 4 equals 0. Real quick, just, yes ma'am.
When we subtract or add or whatever for the solving part, do we do the opposite or we're doing the same number?
Yeah, well, when we're solving for x, and we have x minus 4, we got to do like the inverse property of that when we're solving. So if I have -4 on this side and I need to move it over, how could I get the opposite of -4 to get it to cancel out? Well, I'll just add 4 and they cancel. Okay? Now, what I kind of do is I kind of look at it and say, well, I see x minus 4 equals 0. I know x. What can I plug in there to make this thing 0?
4.
Well, it's got to be 4. Now, here's the cool thing about this, is whenever I say, what's my solution, I'm only going to write it one time.
4.
X equals 4. So if I think about this, and I graph it, and I go over to 4, and I got one solution right there. Any idea what this graph might look like?
Straight line.
No, remember, it's always a parabola,
That's where it touches.
so that's where it touches.
Oh, I know what it be.
It's
It'd be
gonna be
like
just in that
that.
one little thing.
Yes.
Yeah, so it's going to come down kind of like so. It doesn't cross the x-axis, it only touches the x-axis. Okay, it's the only spot where it touches that. Is right here at 4. Okay? So that's the situation where we only have one solution. The other ones we were seeing we had 2 solutions. Now there's still always a chance where we could have no solutions. Okay? And that means that the graph is going to be somewhere up in this square. And we don't actually see it cross that x-axis. Okay? Let's do one more example. This time we're going to do it when a does not equal 1, and we'll see that. And then I'll be able to get you some practice problems. Okay? All right. So now, example 3. Solve for x. We're going to see 4x squared minus 13x plus 10. Plus 10 equals 0. Okay? Now, notice in this one, a is greater than 1. It's a 4, actually. So we have to factor this guy first. So kind of what's that method that we use for factoring?
Multiply the coefficient.
Okay. Yep, multiply that leading coefficient by the c value, and we get 40. Then we kind of factor this guy like normal, x and x. Factors are 40, that could give me 13. Any ideas? 8 and 5. 8 and 5. And we got a plus sign at the end, so both of them have to be minus. So minus 8, minus 5. Don't forget that equals 0. Let's go ahead and solve. Ooh, no, we're not done yet.
You gotta divide.
Yeah, that's right. We do. Once we get this step, we have to divide it by what?
The
The 4.
coefficient.
The leading coefficient. So we really end up with x minus 2 and
4x minus 5.
4x minus 5. Now we get to that solve step, okay? So once we get to this solve step, we know set our factors equal to 0. And here we go. Now I just know if I add 2 over, x is going to be positive 2. Now, here's kind of a trick. Think in your head right now what x would equal. Well, if I add 5 over, I've got 4x equals 5. Then I have to divide by 4. So I take the opposite of 5, or negative 5, and divide it by 4. 5/4. That's kind of like a trick, a shortcut for solving. If not, you can still do it manually. Add 5 over, divide by 4. I promise you, you get the same thing. Okay? So there's our 2 solutions. X equals 5/4 and x equals 2. Okay? Those are our 2 solutions. Now, who am I going to pick on? Katie's. Yeah, there we go. All right. So I want to know, what are my factors? Okay? Remember, these are our key words. What are my factors?
X minus 2 and 4x minus 5.
X minus 2 and 4x minus 5. Very good. So if I said, what are my roots? And I said, CJ, what are my roots? You would tell me
X equals 2 and x equals 5 over 4.
x equals 2 and 5/4. Okay, very good. So we can tell the difference between factors, and then we can tell the difference between roots. Any questions about this? Okay? All right, great job. I'm about to give you some practice problems up here. Will you hit that button for me?
Which one?
On the right side, little red button.